I've really been enjoying. I had some help from Post Malone, so I spent all of today recreating the backing track for it, and I want to walk you guys through how I made all of these layers so that you can better understand how to produce pop country music at home, because all those layers together sound like this. So if you're interested in content like this, hit subscribe, like, bell, all that stuff. And yeah, we'll just jump into it. So I think we will start with the most basic of the elements first, which I think this acoustic guitar is probably the element that's the most recognizable from this song. One thing to note about this acoustic guitar is I can almost bet my life on it that on the actual recording, it's more of like a dobro, like one of these guys. They have like this plate in the middle of them. I just get that vibe from the actual guitar track because there's not a lot of low end in it. It's very tinny and bright. There's some sizzle on it, but also there's like some resonant frequencies in it. I do not have a dobro, so instead I just grabbed the slappiest acoustic that I could find. I used my pencil condenser here and just got it really close to the body, like more towards the body than I would normally make it. And then I just compressed it really heavy and I EQ'd it to be sort of what I was describing. A little bit less low end than normal, cut some of that body out, and then just boosting some resonances in the higher mid range. I'll show you what it sounds like without that EQ. And with it on. In my opinion, I don't think that they're double tracking this. Maybe they use like some stereo mic stuff on the record, but I couldn't hear any. But after that, we have this electric guitar part that is essentially doubling it. If you are in any way, shape, or form going to be recording country on a regular basis, I would highly suggest investing in a telecaster. This is just going to be 90% of what you're using most of the time. For this track, I wanted it to be more of a meaty layer underneath this acoustic, just to make that tinny acoustic a little bit more full. So I have this right in the middle preset that I've tweaked the gain on. It's literally just one of the default country presets in Guitar Rig. But on this track, I've rolled down the tone knob a lot. Like here, let me actually plug the guitar in. So here it is with the tone knob all the way up. Here it is with the tone knob rolled down a bit. Like you can get really musical with it. I feel like the Tele is one of those few guitars where you actually do use the tone knob quite a bit. So if you listen to it, you can still get that grit from it, but it's not high or piercing. So when you layer it with the acoustic, it just feels really full and natural. Then in the intro, some other electric layers we have going on is this guy. That guy comes in on sort of like the main drop in the chorus. He's a little bit buried in the mix, but it just kind of fills out everything. And for this song, all of the chords are in the standard like C shapes. So we have F, C, A minor, then G. And the actual main riff of the song is it just picking through that. With some walk-ups happening here and there. And then near the end, we have this guy, which is the main lead part, again happening on a Tele. Which all these guys are using the same tone, I feel like, with country. In this context, at least, you can kind of get away with using one style of guitar tone. And so all of the guitar layers together sound like this. Now for that lead line, it actually does have some other stuff that's doubling it up. We'll get to those parts later. For now, we can go and we can look at the bass. For this, I'm just using a P bass. I did feel like for this track, it was important to palm mute it instead of, they also might have just been using like a darker bass, but I do feel like it's pretty palm muted most of the time. It's about as standard as it gets. I'm just using an Ampeg SVTR. Didn't really even change it that much from the regular preset. A little bit of optical compression, just because I like it on bass when I'm trying to be gentle, and then some sidechain compression with the kick, which we can now look at the drums, which were super interesting from a mixing standpoint. So here, I'll just show you the pre-chorus going into the chorus. So majority of the sound from the drums is coming from Superior Drummer. I just found the best drum one-shots I could find. So looks like we're using the 16 by 20 inch Yamaha Beach for the kick. We're using the Tamaha Artwood Maple 8 by 14 for the snare, and then a 14 inch Zildjian K Constantinople. Most of the time when I'm picking these cymbals, I'm just going through and generally being like, like I'll do that with my mouth and like be like, okay, generally where is it sitting on the reference track? It's going, and so I'll just kind of like go as I'm picking my cymbals, and I'll just pick the one that's closest out of the ones that I have. And then just a couple of random crashes. I don't believe they use the toms on this one, at least not in the section that I recreated. But yeah, just went through Superior Drummer. I think it's best to route them into their own separate buses. But before I go through the mixing, let me turn off all of the bus processing and just show you how much I had to like work to get this drum sound. So here's what it sounds like with all the processing off. You can tell it's really different. And I am doing a little bit of processing inside of Superior Drummer. I feel like it's just helpful to make it a little bit tighter. So all the kick mics, kick in, out in the sub, are all just going to this one bus. On that bus, we have a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression, and some transient shaping. I just add some EQ to get a general kick shape, then some compression just to get more of the smack out of it, and then some transient shaping just because I felt like that sustain was a little bit longer. And then same on the snare. All the mics are going into this one bus, so without them. So we're just doing a little bit of EQ shape, then some compression, and then those are being routed to their own separate outs outside of Superior Drummer. So they're all being run through individual channels inside of Ableton. So one of the first things that I noticed was there's a little bit of like snare buzz. Like the actual like snare itself on the record was pretty loose. Like the actual wires were a little bit loose. So I just put on some snare buzz. If I turn it up all the way, you can hear it's just like a really loose like of snare wires. And I felt like I could hear it when the kick was going on the record. So I actually duplicated that snare buzz plugin and put it on the kick. I then wanted to beef up this snare track with some samples. So I've been doing a little bit more with Slate Trigger recently. So I have a couple of guys here, this direct snare that has like several different round robins, and then this room. Both of these guys are from the Drum Forge Drum Shots Colin Britton pack. My friend Andrew recommended them, and so I checked them out, and I like them. And the reason why I liked this snare specifically was I needed something that was a little bit more like thwacky, and specifically with these two, they have round robins on them. So it's not like a multi-sampled kit where a different velocity triggers a different sample. It's just they've captured 6 different hits of just going full on tilt with the snare, and it just cycles through them so it doesn't get like that machine gun effect. But yeah, I got a good blend between these two. And then I think I threw in the Taylor Larson snare as well and made the tail really short with a transient shaper. So all together, those snares sound like this. Which, just to make them all feel a little bit more cohesive, I just threw them into a 1176. So there's a really big long tail there. Then I did a little bit of processing on these overheads. There's just some EQ and compression. I mean, it's mainly for the hi-hat at this point. But I noticed that the drum kit had like a very distinct vibe on it that I wasn't really able to replicate until I threw on some like really hardcore clipping. So I threw on some drum bus with drive at like 60% on hard clipping mode. And let me show you what it is without that clipping, gain matched. Same drums, just clipped really hard. Like, you get that folding distortion every time there's a kick or a snare, and I'm surprised, honestly, they got away with this much clipping on the record, because it almost sounds like what you would do to like a hip-hop kit, which it's Post Malone, so it makes sense. But then underneath that, we have a Hammond organ. And as it's going throughout the song, it's going up into different ranges. So that was the first time it comes in on the intro, then it comes in during the pre-chorus. Then it goes a little bit higher during the chorus. And then just big, fat, full chords on the hook. A Hammond organ is really complicated because basically each one of these levers is like controlling what harmonics you're adding to the sound. If I play this part here, if I pull this guy out all the way, it adds more body. If I pull this guy down, you can hear how it's like changing the actual harmonics in the chord. These guys are just really flexible because they can really add a lot of beef really subtly underneath the track without going over the top. You'll even see people who play Hammond organs on a regular basis like pulling out different levers and stuff like that as they're going through the track. It's really cool. This is a really lame version of it, but it gets the job done for the track. Also, a thing to do when you're tracking MIDI for like organ stuff is use the mod wheel to affect how fast the rotary is going, because you'll get this sort of like evolving, like whipping sound that goes through the track. Fade in. It just adds a cool flavor to it, and anytime you hear a Hammond in a track, it's going to be doing that to some extent. And then subtly under the track, I was surprised to hear that there was some kind of like vocal sample going on. These are not the exact same notes that it's playing, but yeah, if you just listen really quietly in the intro, there's this sort of like vocal pad thing going where you can hear specific note being played, but it's really filtered out. So the way I did that was I just grabbed this Distant Voices preset called Pantheon. And then I filtered it out. Then threw it into a really long reverb. And it just creates this ambience in the background of the whole track. Now, in case you haven't already subscribed, I'm going to ask that you do, because for this video, I specifically bought multiple contact libraries just to do this video. So for these next few layers, they're all from Indigenous. Not a sponsor. I bought them with my own money, but just in a pinch, these are the ones that I thought worked the best. Because what we have now are all of like the bare bones of like a country track. But we're missing some of the vibier stuff, and I feel like these libraries have really helped out with that. So I'll just show you what it sounds like as I add them back in. So the first thing we have on the chorus is a couple of violins. To be very clear, I think that if you can get these tracked live as acoustic instruments, that is the best option, but you can kind of get there with MIDI. So here's what those guys sound like soloed. Just a basic harmonized part. We're using the Indigenous Fiddle library, which, in case you couldn't tell, there's different macros here at the bottom that let you control what kind of articulation you're using. So it's mainly that sort of like scooped articulation at the top, but then really quickly I switched to legato mode for that little trill. And so you just control that with these lower keys here. And yeah, as we add these layers in, you'll hear that we're really trying to almost occupy a specific range of articulation. So with these guys, they're very... These are not the exact same notes that they're playing on the record, but I didn't want to spend 15 hours trying to get it note for note. And then in that hook part, it is playing the lead line as well with that tele. But it does it in like an octave lower. For mixing these guys, I didn't really do anything fancy. If I turn it all off, sounds like this. So I just threw in some EQ, some compression, and then a little bit of Moti T to sort of brighten it up a bit. I just wanted to get a little bit of that like rub coming through the track. And then we have the mandolin, which is the most like cobbled together version of a mandolin that I could come up with. So they're very subtly there. You can just hear doing these like upstrokes, but if I solo them, this is the definition of an instrument that I would actually prefer to just use a real one, but I don't have one right now because so much of this is just like this like vibe that I sort of cobbled together with a bunch of different virtual instruments. So we have the mandolin from Indigenous. I used the transient shaper to just boost the attack because I felt like it was almost a little too soft and I wanted that like that you get from a mandolin. And then I just added another articulation of it, just going back and forth between each other. And I liked them, but I almost wanted something a little bit more. And I felt like there was a banjo in the background that either it was a banjo or I just couldn't really hear it that well. So what I did inside of that group was I added session guitarist picked acoustic and I muted it and just really high passed it. And I threw all those guys together into a bus with some compression, and it kind of sounds like a mandolin. Like, it sounds a little weird when you solo it, but I don't know, in the context of a track, you can kind of get that like boom, cat, boom, cat. I don't know, it was as close as I could get. And then we have our last layer, which is this slide. So again, we are using an Indigenous pack. This is the lap steel. So it sounds a little dinky on its own. But this is another one of those instruments where you really need to make sure you're using like the articulations correctly because otherwise it just kind of sounds weird. But I threw that DI into guitar rig, just a twin reverb with some compression. Compression's not really doing that much. It's just to catch a couple of notes that got a little too loud. And then we're doing a little bit of EQ to keep it sort of the piercing, sort of lap steel vibe, a little bit of compression, a little bit of H delay. This is a section that I just rendered out because I just thought it was easier to chop it up as audio, but... And then most of these tracks are going through a little bit of Valhalla Vintage Verb on this large wood room preset. I also guess real quick, I should go through what I'm doing for mastering, which is not a whole lot. Just doing a basic EQ curve with a high pass, a bit of a mid cut around 150, another mid cut around 1K. And then I'm doing a little bit of compression. This guy is high pass, so it's really only catching the snare, going into a little bit of clipping, and then going into a little bit more compression after that. I did a little bit of EQ match with the original instrumental just to be a perfectionist, but you can tell it basically didn't need that much. And then going into a limiter. So yeah, that is the whole track. Again, if you guys enjoyed this video, hit subscribe because I spent a lot of money on plugins for this one. If you want any updates on tone packs or courses, there's a link in the description. Also, there's a Discord community for people producing their own music, so you can join that if you want. But yeah, I will see you guys next week.